Hello and welcome to the Curiosity and Consciousness podcast. The intention of this podcast is to open your mind, get curious about yourself and connect to the power you hold within. I am your host, Karen Maloney, an inside-out coach, helping you to believe in yourself and manifest your desires. Check out the podcast, available on all platforms, and go to my website, www.karenmaloney.com for all info. Hello everybody. Welcome. It's me, Karen Maloney, and thanks for tuning in for another episode as always. Before we jump into today's episode, just a reminder for anyone who is looking for that inner work, internal support and making shifts in their life. I offer coaching and silent counselling sessions, but I'm doing and have been doing specials for January. So we are in the last couple of days to avail of those specials. So you get 2 silent counselling sessions for the price of 1. And I recorded an episode recently on what silent counselling was or is. So you can check that out for more info. And I'm also doing a 6-week tailored one-to-one coaching package. So you can email me as well for details on either of those. Pop me an email, karen@karenmaloney.com. karen@karenmaloney.com. So then joining me today, I have Adele Spraggon, and she is an award-winning thought leader and an international speaker and trainer. She's been awarded the 2020 Woman of Inspiration Award, and in 2021 she was recognised as the top behavioural expert of the year. Her book, Shift, 4 Steps to Personal Empowerment, has won 3 awards and is sweeping the globe, transforming how people are setting and achieving their goals. After decades of feeling stuck in patterns of procrastination, avoidance and quitting, all of which had her living her life below her fullest potential, Adele set out on a journey of discovery and learning. Her inquiry: why the personal and professional methodologies she was following did not work for her. And the result is the creation of her proprietary 4-step repatterning technique, which she delivers through a member portal called the Pattern Maker Hub. Today, she supports thousands globally to achieve extraordinary levels of happiness, peace of mind, prosperity, goal achievement, and life fulfillment. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Adele, and really she's speaking a lot about the brain and how the brain operates and how the brain is a pattern maker, and also how the brain is in a dark, silent room all on its own. There's nothing there, but it is reading patterns and it is reading electrical impulses that are running through there. And we have patterns because that's the programs or the operating systems that have been downloaded on it. So knowing that, she empowers us to know that we do make change from the inside out, and we can change patterns easily once we are aware of how our brain works in the first place. So a really, really fascinating, interesting conversation. And Adele also shares the 4 steps of her repatterning technique. She goes through them quickly, but they are covered more in depth in her book. And she also shares how feeling any resistance or fear to change is normal as well, and what we need to do to move through that. So a really empowering conversation, and she leaves us with a really beautiful and important message as well at the end for us to all remember and just remind ourselves of. So have a listen, check it out. And if you want to find out more on Adele's work, you can go to her website, www.adelespraggon.com. That's ADELE, Adele Spraggon, SPRAGGON.com. But as always, I will have links from my website, karenmaloney.com. Go to the podcast section and all Adele's links will be there. So enjoy and let me know what you take from this episode. Hello everybody. Welcome and thanks for tuning in for another episode. I have the wonderful Adele Spraggon joining me today. So first of all, you're very welcome and thanks for joining today, Adele.
Oh, thanks, Karen. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and just even from our quick little chit chat there before we started recording, I'm really interested to connect with you today and have this empowering conversation, I feel it'll be. But maybe if you just set the scene for us a little and tell us some of your journey that brought you to this work and being a behavioral change expert. struggling with that
Sure.
word.
Yes. I, as many of your audience probably have been, I was on a journey to understand myself for decades before my chosen career now. I like to say that I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I only grew up at the age of 47. That's when I became a behavioral change expert.
Amazing.
Um, but I was on a mission to understand myself, to understand God, to understand consciousness. And frankly, all the methodologies that I was using were not working for me. So I was following all the provided instructions that were on the market, such as, set a goal and then make sure that goal is specific and measurable and make sure you know the steps to get there. Get coaching if you don't know how, change your mindset, make sure you're thinking positive. Align with the divine, tune into your intuition. And I was a meditation facilitator at this point. I was a Kundalini yoga instructor. And still, regardless, Karen, I had high levels of anxiety. I was having panic attacks almost every day. I was quitting business after business after business. Every business I started, I would just turn around and turn tail and run whenever I got close to success. And I had these patterns of behavior that would just stop me. And so I decided, okay, it can't be me. After 15 years, 20 years of doing this, I thought there's got to be something wrong with the instructions. So I took myself to university. I started to study the human equation. How does this human brain of ours think? How does it make decisions? How does it take action? And sure enough, I discovered that all the instructions I had been trying to use in the past were just ineffective because they're not aligned with how the brain actually works. And so I did a deep intuitive look into my own brain, and I determined new operating instructions, I like to say. And as I started applying them, everything just shifted in my life. The panic attacks stopped. I quit drinking. I was a heavy drinker. I just stepped away from that. I stopped quitting. In fact, I like to say I stepped out of one identity into another, one identity in which quitting was an option into another in which it just wasn't. I stepped out of one identity in which I drank into another in which I just didn't. And I went, wow, this is powerful stuff. So I started teaching it. And I've been teaching it for the last 10 years. And the results are incredible. I mean, our last little group, they saw a 40% reduction in conflicts and a 60% ability to make decisions quickly and effectively, and 160% decrease in taking things personally. So that's how remarkable the brain is when we know how to work it.
Wow. Amazing. And thank you for sharing that. That's really fascinating. I love how it's that journey, isn't it, of trying to understand ourselves first. And then when we learn or discover some things, then want to share it and serve in a bigger way. And I love that. And I'd love to know, what were some of the things that you discovered about your brain and how it operates and how it works that really made everything kind of fall into place for you as well? I know that's probably a deep topic, but even just to touch on it, because I'm sure a lot of people can relate with having practices, whether meditation, whether prayer, journaling, whatever the case may be, and still feeling in those self-sabotage cycles or not quite getting there. So what was it really that helped you to excel and, like you say, shift from one identity into another?
Yeah, so probably a couple of things. One of the biggest aha moments for me was when I discovered John Dylan Haynes' work. And John Dylan Haynes worked at the time at a Max Planck Institute. And he determined that if we hook your brain up to a brain scanner, that brain scanner would be able to determine the action that you're about to take before the conscious mind knows that you're going to take that action. So my quitting pattern, right, was coming from an unconscious region of my brain first. And then my conscious mind was just justifying why I needed to quit. So our brain is what I call a pattern maker. It's designed to create patterns. In fact, that's the only thing it can do. And I'll explain that in a moment. once it has one of those patterns in it, it just continues to loop back into taking that same action over and over again. Whether that action is effective or not doesn't matter. The brain isn't interested in helping you thrive. It's interested in survival. And the fastest route to survival is, according to your brain, the way it works, is taking the same action you took yesterday. And so it just kept looping back. So the biggest aha for me was, oh, okay, hang on a minute. My thoughts are not driving my choices. What I'm thinking makes no difference. In fact, everything I'm thinking is just the result of an existing brain pattern. And so what I realized was, okay, I got to change that pattern first. Once I change that, then I can make new actions, take new choices, have new thoughts, right? And I don't have to fight so hard to be thinking positive or to be connecting to the divine source. It was just natural, because that, as I see it now, is how the brain is wired. So that was one. And I should say I had two aha moments. So I'll just dive into my next one, unless you have a question about that one.
No, go for it. Okay. Yeah.
So the other real aha for me was when I realized that this brain of ours is actually inside a dark and silent room. There's no taste in there. There's no touch. There's no sight. There's no sound. There is nothing inside our skull other than electrical impulses that are flying down existing neural pathways. So what that meant, that I realized, the conclusion that I drew from that was, oh, okay, hang on a minute. I'm thinking that I'm actually accessing the outside world. I'm thinking that I am seeing the tree outside my window. But in reality, what I am seeing is a pattern in my brain for tree. And there's as much information that is flowing out of the brain to give the impression of tree as there is flowing in through the senses, telling me that that is a tree. And until I have a pattern for tree, I can't acknowledge that tree. So great. I mean, that's fantastic for tree, but the same is true for my husband, for example. The same is true for my children. I'm not actually seeing them. I'm seeing a pattern that I created in my brain that gives me an impression of them. That put me in a position of control. Then it was like, oh, okay, all I have to do is own this pattern, own my reaction, and I get to change that.
Oh, I love that. And before connecting, I didn't. I was really fascinated about the conversation, but I didn't think it'd be going into these levels. And a couple of questions are coming up for me that, from what you said, that are just sparking in my mind. And it's, well, first of all, this idea of, a lot of people talk about what you're talking about in the brain, you know, that pattern or that automatic response is actually the subconscious mind, and it's in our body, not in our brain.
Exactly.
What's your take on that? And then we can come to the next question that popped in.
Well, you know, it's so interesting, isn't it? The way that our modern society separates body and mind, as if those are two separate things, right?
Yeah.
But when we think about how the brain works, our only understanding of ourself, of what is going on in the body, is also arising inside our brain. So the experience that we have of ourself, and many of your listeners have heard this. Have you heard the expression the Buddha said 2,500 years ago? There is no self, right? We totally misunderstand what that means. But if we start to understand how the brain works, it makes total sense. Because a pattern, so I said that all your brain is patterning, okay? A pattern is an intertwined physical sensation, emotion, thought. All of that is arising inside the brain. That's our impression of ourself and of the world is arising there. And it is given by how we feel physically, how we feel emotionally, and what our thinking mind is saying or telling us. Okay? When you think about it, your identity, who you know yourself to be as Karen, is also a pattern that is arising in the brain, correct? So that means that we get to change our identity. We're not stuck trying to figure out who we are or who we should be, or if there's some authentic self in there. If we really embrace what Buddha was telling us, we are adaptability itself. That is the nature of humanity. we are shapeshifters. We change depending on the situation that we're in. So I'm not the same here talking to you, Karen, as I am when I'm watching TV with my husband. I'm a different identity, a different person, right? And the
Mhm.
same is true if I go out into the world and go into a networking event, for example. I'm going to be a different person than when I'm hanging around my friends. That is the nature of humanity. And that's given by a trinary intertwining of physical, emotional, and mental. And that's the piece that's missing.
So fascinating. But then just at that last part, when you're saying we do kind of mold and change depending on the situation that we're in, and that can be a very destructive pattern in people pleasing when we lose our sense of self. But then can we come to a place where we feel really connected and solid in who we are and realize we're enough that actually we don't really mold ourselves to situations anymore?
Yeah, it's an interesting paradox. When we understand the way the brain works, we're actually seeing two different distinct realities that are arising at the same time in the same place. Okay.
Mhm.
So on one side, as you're saying, you can lose yourself by not saying I am an identity, because then you'll be constantly shifting and changing, trying to please the people around you. That's actually not the level I'm talking about. What I'm suggesting is that there is power in being able to transform, to adapt optimally to the situation that we're in. And optimally always takes care of you as well as other people. Okay. So, but to do that, to be able to, I like to say it this way. Ideally, we ought to, as human beings, be able to walk through any door, not know who we need to be in order to optimally align with the situation that we're about to enter. Okay. So we kind of arise into the space based on the optimal pattern rather than arrive there from the past, which is what
Mm.
we are trying to do when we're using past created patterns. Now, I may have totally just lost you, Karen, so I'm going to pause there and let you ask any questions or tell me if that made sense.
No, well, yeah, that made total sense to me. And like you say, being able to arise in the situation without having to worry of, ooh, like you say, projecting the past already of, ooh, in a similar situation, I was this way and ooh, it made me feel whatever. And even, there's a line in the Course in Miracles that says, I only see the past. And we're so programmed that way that we don't allow a situation to arise as it's meant to arise or going to arise in that moment because we're already bringing the past with us or how something went before and kind of comparing them and projecting that onto situations as well. But also then as well, when you were saying about we're seeing things based off of kind of what we know and patterns that we have in our brain, whether it's a tree, whether it's a person, whether it's whatever. So then it comes back to as well, or what's your take then on this saying that reality is an illusion? How does that tie in?
Definitely. Yes, I would say in some ways it is. So I'll just explain it though from the perspective of your brain rather than
Mhm.
from the perspective of a spiritual understanding. So every pattern, when you're born, okay, when a person's born, there are no patterns. It's not like we're animals. Animals have
Mhm.
instincts, they know exactly what to do, right? Human beings have to learn everything. So when we're born pretty much a blank slate. Let's just say a couple of patterns in there, but not much. And we have to very, very quickly piece together patterns. So every situation that we enter into, the brain takes that pattern, takes what's happening physically, emotionally, mentally, pieces it together and stores it away for future use. And once the brain has done that, it says, great. Now, the next time I encounter a similar situation, and similar is the word to listen for here. The next time I encounter a similar situation, the brain thinks, I know this situation based on that past
Mhm.
situation. So, what it does is it kind of puts a filter over the current situation based on the past. This is how we are able to meet somebody new and think that we know them. This is how we're able to take something that somebody says and go, oh, they're just like my mother, or oh, they're just like my husband, right?
Yeah.
Because the brain is constantly trying to find similarities between what's going on in the present and what's going on in the past when that pattern was first created. That
Mhm.
provides us with an illusion of the present moment. And as some of your listeners may have had the experience of, it is a very different place when we are operating from past created patterns as when we're operating from a brand new pattern that is arising here in this moment. So let me just explain what I said. Most of the time, this filter given by the past dulls everything a little bit. And those moments where everything is lit up and luminous and you're in what is called the flow, that is because the brain is now creating an optimal pattern that is aligned perfectly with the present situation. And those who have had that experience know how deliciously unique and rich that experience is. Okay. That is actually built right into your brain. It's the way the brain is supposed to work. It's supposed to be letting go of those past patterns and aligning itself moment to moment with the current situation. But because we're not taught about patterns, because nobody has told us how to let go of an old pattern that doesn't work so we can create a new one, our brain consistently creates this illusion from the past. And that's what that's saying.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for explaining that as well from the brain pattern side of things. And I'm just really enjoyed this conversation, and I have so many questions I could ask, but then I suppose we should bring it maybe a bit more practical as well for people. So in having this knowledge as well, and in you sharing as well this power of, well, we are creating our patterns whether we realize it or not, and we have the potential and the capacity to create a whole new reality of what we are seeing. So then how does a person begin to create that new reality for themselves?
Awesome. So I teach what I call a 4-step repatterning technique, and I'll just briefly go through the 4 steps. So step 1 is to identify the pattern itself. So remember I said there's a physical sensation, emotion, thought, which is giving rise to an action or a behavior or belief. Okay. So I like to say, think of your mind as an iceberg. The top of the water is everything that you do, everything that you think, everything that you feel, that's up there. Okay. Everything you believe, every behavior you adopt, I should say. Under the water is where the patterns lie. And the patterns are those neural pathways in the brain that just give rise to that. Okay, great. So knowing that, we can identify the pattern. So if somebody has something that's not working, they're taking an action like I was, quitting, right? Then you can say, oh, okay, what's the physical sensation? What's the emotion? What's the thought that drives me to quit? Okay, so that's just step 1. You're going to identify what that pattern is. Step 2, as I said, is to own it as a pattern. It's not actually aligned with the situation you're in. There was no real logical reason for me to quit other than the logic that my brain created, which was based on a past created pattern. Okay. So what the brain tells us it needs to do and why it needs to do it is often just the result of the illusion given by the past situation. So in my past, at one point, I had quit and that had worked. And my brain, therefore, had stored that pattern. And so it just continued to do that, thinking, oh, this will work again. And of course, it was driving me absolutely crazy. Right? So it didn't work at all. So knowing that, I could own it as a pattern. I created that, I could say, with absolute certainty. I created the desire to quit. I created the action of quitting. That was mine to own. That's step 2. Step 3, you're going to use the body. I love how you said, body and mind are actually intertwined, and the subconscious is actually arising in the body. It's our closest connection to the subconscious is those feelings. So we're going to use it because that is actually more present, more here now than the thought are. So using the body, we can use a process of surrendering to its experience rather than to the brain's experience. That can be a little tricky to understand. My book outlines exactly how to do it. And then the next step is where we start to create those brand new patterns, which are going to drive new actions. So that's the practical way to do it. Now, what do we do? Well, first we identify what isn't working, and then we use the 4 steps to change the underlying pattern. At that point, you'll just naturally step out of one identity into a new identity, and it's transformational.
Amazing. And I love that you include the body as well in step 3, because again, well, my learnings and understandings as well is that everything is held in the body and that energy on a cellular level. And that's why we have to release from there as well to make it long lasting change. And, maybe that's slightly different to what you align with as well, but that's certainly been my experience as well. And how do people make it lasting then as well? Lasting change, because, it's great to catch it in the moment or identify the pattern itself and to accept it and change it in that moment. But then how do they make it long lasting so they don't revert back to the old patterns again? Or maybe even speaking to the resistance that does show up a bit, because there is that familiar pattern in the brain that maybe wants to keep us back in what's familiar, because moving into something new feels a little bit scary and maybe threatening to that underlying survival mode that the brain wants to keep us in.
Absolutely. You've asked two very important questions there, so I'm going to answer them each independently.
Perfect.
The first one, will you encounter resistance? 100%. Okay. So absolutely. And why? Because there is one thing that every human being fears on this planet. There is one thing that the brain fears, and that is the unknown.
No.
It's not public speaking. It's not death. It is the unknown that is shared. And familiar patterns, as you say, taking those familiar actions, those are known. So whether they work or not does not matter to the brain. It's familiar, therefore it's safe, therefore it wants to keep it, therefore resistance when we try and first change it. Mm-hmm. And that's why when I teach this tool, I teach it over a 6-week window. And if somebody gets the book and wants to do it themselves, I highly recommend that you do each step for a week before continuing on to the next step, and give your brain an opportunity to relax into the unknown rather than needing to fear it. Okay. In our instant gratification world, that sometimes takes something for somebody to do. The second question you asked was a very interesting one. Is this permanent? Yes. Once you have completely transformed a pattern, and the way to think about this is think about a neural pathway in your brain. It is connected. Okay. So you have two neural wirings and they both are together. All right. Imagine though, if you tease those apart, and once you tease that neural pathway apart, it is going to immediately snap into a brand new channel. But that brand new channel is going to take a different action, a new action, one that you've never taken before. And that old pathway no longer exists. So once somebody has fully transformed a pattern, it never comes back. As I was saying, my desire to quit, I don't even think, it's not like I'm hanging on, Karen, trying not to quit. It's just gone. I just don't have to even worry about it anymore, right? Same with my drinking. I'm not fighting myself, trying not to have a glass of wine. It's just completely gone. I just don't even, you can put wine in front of me and it's not a pattern in my brain, so I wouldn't even look at it. Okay. So it's that dramatic. And that's what's really missing in today's methodologies. It's the ability to use the brain so that you don't have to keep fighting yourself over and over again, right? It's the ability to know how the brain works so that you can give yourself an opportunity to never have to worry about the past as we do today, worry about what we're going to do.
Yeah. So true. And I can totally agree as well with different things in my life that, they're just a total non-issue anymore. Even if it comes to different foods and things like that, it's like, there is no battle. There is no me trying to tell myself like, oh no, don't eat it. Don't eat the fast food or whatever it is. It's just like, and I look at it as well as a total internal change. Yes, there's obviously the brain pattern, the new neural pathway in the first place, but also then it changes my whole energy and vibration and frequency that I've elevated out of that old vibration. So it's no longer a match either as well.
Exactly.
And like you say, it is a total change, and that's what's just so fascinating about it. But it does take that bit of persistence as well in the first place to create that new neural pathway. And I think, I love that you confirmed as well that resistance is normal, because, we are breaking into something new, and it's not a reason to give up or go, oh, I'm not doing it right, or this will never work for me. It's just that, no, that's a part of it and it's all okay and it's still possible. So I really like that as well.
Yes. Yeah. And,
Then, yeah.
and I mean, I should say, based on what you just said, Karen, that the brain has the potential to rewire itself all the time. And it's
Mm,
always trying to do corrections in order to align with the current moment. The problem is never in the individual. There is one problem on this planet, and that's that nobody has taught us how to change an old pattern that's no longer working. That is
mm,
the fundamental problem. Once we know how to do that, all problems disappear. It's like, oh,
yeah.
yeah, okay, I got a tool in my pocket. I can change that. I don't have to worry about having to fight myself, as you're saying, battle yourself to change it.
Yeah. So true. And that's why I call myself an inside out coach as well, because it all starts within. It's
Yes.
fundamentally changing our own wiring, our own physiology, our own vibration internally to then experience and see and create a whole different world externally. Whereas again, our society, we want that quick fix. Usually we just focus on the end product and it's like, oh no, just sort this quick, or like that. We fight ourselves and we battle against trying not to do something that we think we shouldn't be doing. And I mean, it just doesn't work.
Yes, yes.
um,
And we feel guilty and wrong
yeah.
and all of that. And, I like to say we swim today in a world of blame and shame because we don't
Hmm.
understand our brain at a fundamental level. And once we do, all of that blame and shame disappears. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, I got a pattern that did that. Huh. Okay. I got a tool to change that. I don't have to fight myself anymore.
Yeah. And then just say for some people who, and I used to be one of them many years ago, who is that person who just is highly anxious, wired, doesn't stop, is all go, 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 doesn't take a moment. Because to even begin step one, to identify the pattern itself, it takes a moment, it takes being quiet, it takes a pause, maybe. So, how do you help some people as well who are in that really high anxiety energy or space to, I don't know, maybe even take a pause or begin that first step of becoming aware?
Yeah, great question again. So, well, first of all, I should say that the technique itself is a 2-minute technique. It doesn't take a long time to shift a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing, there's a few ways that I approach that. First, slow it down. Just do one step at a time, as I was saying, right? But there's something else that's really important to know. Remember, I said at the beginning that neuroscience has now determined that the action that we're taking is coming before conscious
Mm.
awareness. It's actually originating in the unconscious regions of our mind. By the time our conscious brain catches up to the fact that it's taking an action, the impetus to act, the desire to act is already running. Okay.
Yeah.
So to try to stop a pattern while it's in motion is like trying to stop a train that is already moving down the track.
Mm.
So there's a much easier way. I always begin by working off a list. I always tell the person, him and I, her and I, we do a phone call where I am there listening for patterns. And I'm an expert to listen for patterns. You can do it yourself, but it's tricky because a lot of our own patterns are hidden from ourselves. So find somebody who is able to hear what is not working for you at the level of action, behavior, belief. Okay. Then take that list and do it when the pattern is not running. So let me just give a clear example. Let's say that somebody has a pattern of losing their temper. Okay. So when the kids come home, the house is a mess, and they know for a fact that they're going to lose their temper when they walk through that door. Great. Don't wait until you're walking through the door in order to repattern it. Trigger the information in your brain by imagining walking through the door. Now you're one step removed from the pattern, and it's much easier to work on that pattern when the situation is not arising. Then, eventually, once you've got the tool and you're comfortable using it, you will be able to use it in the moment as that pattern is arising. But at first, step off the mat, right? Come off the mat where you're not wrestling with the pattern and do it in your imagination first.
Yeah, amazing. Such a valid point. And, that's why as well, it's that daily practice as well. So when you're in the situation, you have the tools and skills and know how to do it, like you say, as opposed to trying to fight your way through it or change it mid pattern. So yeah, really, really valid point there as well. I love that. And such a fascinating conversation. And honestly, I could keep going for so much longer. But maybe if you just share a little bit more, you mentioned your book and it's called Shift, 4 Steps to Personal Empowerment. So maybe if you just share a little bit more on your book as well for us.
Yeah, so the book outlines the entire technique. It gives some great case studies in there and stories about how to use the technique and how people have used it in the past. It also goes into more detail about how the brain works and why repatterning is so effective to change actions, behaviors, beliefs. And, any of your listeners who are interested, I would love to gift them a copy. You can get one free. All I ask is that people pay for shipping, and I will send one out to you autographed by me. And also on my website, there's free training there as well. So if people are really interested in the topic of the brain and how the brain is working, there's some free training in there. And I love to support everybody in this repatterning technique. So people can also join my Pattern Maker Hub, which is a community of pattern makers. And it includes all the training, and you can get 30 days of that for free to check it out. So lots of opportunities.
Fantastic. And before I get you to share where people can find out all that great stuff, and as always, I'll have it all linked in the show notes as well. Maybe if you could just leave us with a couple of simple tips, or maybe your personal favorite, whether practices or tools or techniques that help you to feel, or can help us to feel personally empowered as well.
Yeah. So biggest tip that I can provide anybody is, and it's so tricky, right? But if you do something that you regret doing, or if you do something and you say, oh my gosh, I said I would never do that again, and here I am, try to please remember it is just a pattern. It is your brain just doing what it does beautifully, which is try and keep you safe. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, if somebody else does something that triggers you, I also try to remind everybody to be gentle, because they too are just running their patterns and they don't mean to do anything. It's not personal. They have replaced you with somebody from their past. That's all that's happened. And they're reacting to that pattern in their brain, not to you. So those two things are really, really helpful, especially so that we can step away from the blame and shame that we live in, and just really start to embrace the beauty of our brains and of who we are.
Oh, yes. What a beautiful message as well to leave with. And just amazing, incredible reminders as well that they are just patterns, and to be gentle with others as well. I loved it, Adele. Thank you so much for joining today and sharing. And please share your website or where people can find out more in your work.
Yeah, so the easiest place is just to go to adelespraggon.com. That's my, you can get everything there. If you want a copy of my book, then shift 4 steps, that's the number 4.com. You can also go there. Brilliant. So adelespraggon.com or shift4steps.com if you just want a copy of the book.
Great. And I will link them both as well on the show notes. And again, thank you so much. Really fascinating conversation. I could have spoken and talked to you for so much longer, but maybe another time as well, we can look at other different aspects of the brain. But thank you so much. And I wish you all the best.
And thank you, Karen. And I'd love to be back. Thanks for having me.